Have you ever felt like life's trying to tell you something? Like there are these hidden messages if you just knew how to read them.
It's pretty fascinating when you think about it, isn't it? I mean, for generations, cultures all over the world have been wrestling with these ideas, exploring, destiny, fate, those subtle hints that seem to be coming from outside of ourselves.
And that is exactly what we're going to be unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into this YouTube video that tackles those questions through the lens of Carl Jung, the psychologist. We're going to decode some of his most powerful concepts and then look at how those might apply to your life.
Jung's work is such a treasure trove of insights into the human psyche. I'm really excited to see what this video brings to the surface.
Well, right out of the gate, the video starts with this really striking analogy. Just like nature has its cycles, the seasons changing, the sun rising and setting, could our lives have a rhythm too that maybe we often miss?
That's a very core concept in Jungian thought, this idea that there's this inherent order to things. He saw challenges not as mistakes or setbacks, but as like integral parts of this much larger process of growth and transformation.
So it's like instead of resisting those tough times, what if we try to see them as stepping stones? Like how a harsh winter preps the soil for a really vibrant spring, like the video mentions.
Exactly. But here's like the key takeaway that really resonated with me. It's not enough to just acknowledge it intellectually. The real shift happens when you can actually feel this truth deep down. That's when the real transformation began.
I struggle with that all the time, wanting to change, but feeling like I am stuck in these old patterns. How do we move beyond just good intentions and actually break free from those cycles that we seem to repeat over and over again?
Jung believed that those repeating patterns are often driven by what he called the shadow self. Those aspects of ourselves that we've repressed, denied, or just decided were unacceptable. Like they're operating behind the scenes, influencing our choices without us even realizing.
That analogy of a beach ball being held underwater is so powerful. You can only push it down for so long before it just bursts back up with way more force.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to understand those hidden parts of ourselves? It feels honestly a bit daunting.
Yeah, it can be challenging work for sure.
Yeah.
But, Jung believed that until we bring the unconscious into consciousness, it will direct our life, and we'll just call it fate. One way to approach this is to start by paying attention to those things that trigger really strong emotional reactions in us, especially the negative ones.
So if I find myself always getting so irritated by someone who's constantly boasting, maybe deep down I'm envious of their confidence or I'm pushing down my own desire to be more assertive.
Precisely. Those little tiny annoyances can be huge clues pointing to aspects of ourselves that we just haven't fully integrated yet. It's not about judging ourselves for having these shadow parts, but about understanding them, accepting them, and maybe even learning from them.
What's so fascinating is that Jung actually believed that these shadow elements aren't inherently bad. They can hold so much creative potential. He pointed to artists, writers, musicians. They often pull from those deeper, more complex emotions to produce some of their most powerful.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we are multifaceted beings, full of light and shadow. Our wholeness comes from integrating all those different pieces, not from denying or trying to suppress.
Its next part, I think, will really resonate with a lot of people. Those moments that feel way too coincidental to be just random chance. The video calls it synchronicity. Running into someone you were just thinking about stumbling upon the exact information you need right when you need it. Have you ever experienced something like that?
I'm sure many of our listeners have had very similar experiences. Jung believed that synchronicities happen when your internal state aligns with external circumstances. It's not that the universe is bending over backwards to make these events happen for us, but rather that we become more attuned to the connections that have always been there.
It's like tuning into a very specific radio frequency, and all of a sudden you're noticing things you might have completely missed before.
Exactly. And when we're open to these synchronicities, they can offer us valuable insights and guidance. It's almost like life is trying to speak to us if we only take the time to listen.
This kind of makes me wonder about destiny versus free will. If we're truly free to make our own choices, how do these synchronicities even fit into that? Is there a script we're all meant to follow, or are we really the authors of our own stories?
Oh man, that's the age-old debate, isn't it? Jung actually had a more nuanced view on this. He saw destiny not as a fixed path, but more like a river. You can go with the flow, you can fight it, or you can even create a whole new channel entirely.
That's a pretty powerful way to think about it. The video even describes this as being like a river with a natural flow, but having the ability to influence our course.
Exactly. It's a very empowering perspective because it reminds us that we're not just these passive passengers. We actually have agency, the ability to influence our own journey, even within whatever constraints we might have.
This is making me think about how I approach decisions and how I create meaning in my life in a very different way. If we're not just victims of circumstance, where can we really exert influence, and how do we make choices that are aligned with that deeper sense of purpose?
That's a crucial question for sure, and one that we'll actually dive into even further as we continue this deep dive. But I think a key takeaway here is that it's not about sourcing things to happen, but about becoming more aware of the currents that are already present in our lives and choosing how we want to navigate them.
The video then goes on to debunk this myth of the lone wolf, this idea that we have to achieve everything on our own to be successful. Nature shows us a very different story, though. Think about trees. They thrive because they're interconnected, they support each other, they share resources. It's a whole network of collaboration.
That's a really vital point that often gets overlooked. Jung recognized the importance of collaboration. He believed that while individual strength is essential, we actually achieve far more when we work together. Look at any major achievement, groundbreaking art, successful businesses, scientific breakthroughs. Collaboration fuels progress.
It makes you wonder, where in your life might you actually benefit from seeking support, mentorship, or teamwork, rather than trying to go it alone?
Yeah, it's definitely a question worth pondering for sure. Perhaps there are some areas where we're carrying burdens that could be so much lighter if we shared them with other people.
This whole idea of connection really resonates with me. We're often told to focus on what we know, but the video sort of shifts gears here to explore wisdom as not just what we know, but how we live and respond to life's challenges.
That's a key distinction. Jung saw wisdom as an embodied practice about cultivating certain qualities, like remaining calm in the face of difficulty and understanding that challenges are just part of a much larger process.
So it's not about avoiding challenges altogether, but about changing how we actually relate to them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A wise person focuses on what they can control and lets go of everything else. They act decisively when they need to, but they also know when to just trust the flow of life.
Those are some really valuable skills, but how do we cultivate them in our own lives? It feels like a huge task sometimes.
Oh, it's definitely a lifelong journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's a constant process of self-discovery and learning to trust the unfolding of things, and I think this is a perfect spot to pause for now.
This has been so insightful already. We've covered so much ground, from recognizing life's inherent rhythms to embracing collaboration and even those uncanny synchronicities that just make you wonder if there's more to life than what we see on the surface.
And we've only just scratched the surface of Jung's work. There are so many more layers to uncover, so many more insights to glean from this vast body of knowledge.
We'll be back in part 2 to explore some of his most practical wisdom for navigating life's challenges and creating a more fulfilling journey. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Carl Jung.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Picking up where we left off, exploring how his insights can really help us to understand ourselves and the world around us, a little bit better.
You mentioned a lifelong journey right before we took a break. It makes me think of one of Jung's most intriguing concepts, the shadow self. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, definitely. Remember how Jung believed that we all have this sort of hidden side to our personalities? The shadow self, which contains all those parts of ourselves that we've repressed or denied or just deemed unacceptable.
It's like that old saying, everything you hate about other people is something you deny in yourself.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But Jung believed that integrating our shadow is really crucial for personal growth. It's not about getting rid of those less than desirable traits, but about, understanding them and accepting them as part of who we are.
This kind of reminds me of that analogy we talked about earlier of trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can only push it down for so long before it pops right back up with even more force. But how do we even begin to integrate those shadow parts? It can feel honestly a little bit scary to even acknowledge them, let alone embrace them.
It's a process that requires courage and a lot of self-compassion. One way to begin is by just paying attention to the things that tend to trigger really strong emotional reactions in us, especially the negative ones. Those reactions can actually often point to aspects of ourselves that we've sort of disowned.
Okay, so let's say I get super frustrated by someone who is always interrupting other people. Could that be a sign that maybe I'm suppressing my own need to be heard, or that I'm afraid of speaking up for myself?
That is an excellent example. It's all about asking ourselves, why does this bother me so much? What part of me is being reflected back here? The answers might really surprise you.
This also kind of ties back to those repeating patterns that we discussed before. If we're not really aware of our shadow, then those unaddressed issues can keep popping up in our lives over and over again, right?
Exactly. Jung believed that until we bring our unconscious into consciousness, it will direct our lives, and we will just call it fate. It's like we're stuck on autopilot, just reacting to life instead of consciously choosing our own path.
But let's be honest, sometimes those shadow parts can feel scary or shameful. How do we approach those feelings without becoming completely overwhelmed by them?
I think it's really crucial to approach this work with a lot of gentleness and a lot of self-acceptance. Remember, everybody has a shadow. It's part of what makes us human. The goal isn't to judge ourselves for having these parts, but to try to understand them, integrate them, and maybe even learn from them.
So instead of always looking at our shadow as like something to fear, maybe we can begin to see it as a source of potential that we haven't tapped into yet. It's like turning those so-called weaknesses into strength.
Exactly. Our shadow can actually hold a lot of creative energy and a lot of wisdom. Think of all the artists, writers, musicians. They often tap into their shadow side to create some of their most powerful work. They allow themselves to actually feel the full range of human emotions and express them in their art.
It makes me think about the pressure to always be positive and happy. It's like we're not allowed to acknowledge the darker, messier parts of being.
Right. That's definitely a very common message in our culture. But suppressing those emotions doesn't actually make them disappear. It often just shoves them deeper down into the unconscious, where they can grow and manifest in unhealthy ways.
So maybe the key is to give ourselves permission to feel all of the human emotions, even the uncomfortable ones.
Absolutely. And that's where practices like mindfulness and self-compassion can be so helpful. They allow us to just observe our thoughts and our emotions without any judgment, creating space for acceptance and for healing.
Now, earlier we were talking about the concept of synchronicity, those seemingly coincidental events that feel like they have a deeper meaning behind them. Those times when it feels like the universe is sending you a message or maybe guiding you in some way.
Right. Those times when you stumble upon a solution to a problem just when you really need it, or you run into someone that you were just thinking about, it can feel almost magical.
But is it just a coincidence, or is there something more going on?
The videos seem to imply that there's some kind of connection between our inner state and these outer events that are happening.
Jung believed that synchronicities happen when our internal state lines up with external circumstances. It's kind of like we're tuned to a specific frequency, and then we start noticing the things that resonate with that same frequency.
So it's not that the universe is like bending over backwards to create these things for us, but that we just become much more aware of the connections that have always been there.
Exactly. And when we're open to those synchronicities, they can give us some really valuable insights and guidance. It makes me think about times when I've been struggling with a big decision, and then seemingly out of nowhere, a book or a conversation or even like a billboard just grabs my attention and it gives me exactly the insight I needed.
Yeah, it can feel pretty uncanny for sure. But those moments tend to happen when we're truly open to receiving guidance.
It's like those synchronicities are confirming that we're headed in the right direction, even if we don't have all the answers just yet.
That's a great way to put it. And it speaks to that deeper trust in the process that we were talking about before.
This whole deep dive is really making me think about life in a new way. It's not just about going through the motions. It's about really paying attention to those deeper currents that are shaping our experiences both internally and externally.
And recognizing that we actually have a lot more agency than we sometimes realize.
Yeah.
We can choose to engage with those currents consciously and co-create a life that feels more meaningful and aligned with our true self.
I really like that idea of co-creating our lives with the universe. It reminds me of that saying, leap and the net will appear. It's about taking those courageous steps forward, even when you don't have every single.
And that sense of trust is so important. Trusting that we are being guided and supported and that life itself is unfolding in a way that is ultimately for our greatest good.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the wisdom of Carl Jung. We've been exploring how his ideas can help us all navigate life's challenges and even create a more fulfilling journey for ourselves.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating so far, hasn't it? I'm excited to kind of dig into some of Jung's most practical insights.
Me too. I'm especially curious about this idea of individuation that the video kept mentioning. What exactly does that mean? And how do we even begin to kind of embark on a journey like that?
Well, individuation for Jung is the process of becoming like a whole integrated self. It's about uncovering your unique potential and then living a life that feels authentic to you.
That sounds like a pretty big project, not something you can just check off a to-do list.
Right. It's not about reaching some perfect end state, but it's about continually trying to become more aware of, who you are, what you value, what your purpose in life might be. It's about accepting all the different pieces of yourself, the good and the bad, the strengths, and even the vulnerabilities, and then integrating them into a unified whole.
This makes me think about the pressure to always be positive and happy. It's like we're not even allowed to acknowledge our darker emotions or our struggle. But you're saying that facing those difficulties, even the really painful ones, is actually crucial for growth.
Yeah, that's right. It's not about pretending that everything is okay all the time. It's about having the courage to face those challenging emotions head on and then learn from them. When we try to avoid or suppress those feelings, we actually stop ourselves from fully experiencing, all the richness and depth that life really has to offer.
Yeah. This makes me think about something the video was talking about, trusting the process, just accepting that life isn't always going to be easy or predictable, but that there's wisdom in surrendering to the flow. It's like learning to dance with life's rhythms instead of always trying to control them.
I love that analogy. Jung actually often used the image of a river to kind of describe this concept. We can try to swim against the current, but it takes a lot of energy, and we may not even get very far. But if we learn to go with the flow, we can actually conserve our energy and even, maybe enjoy the journey a little bit more.
That doesn't mean we just become passive, though, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between taking action and letting go. We're still making choices and, steering our course, but we do it with a sense of trust and acceptance, knowing that life is unfolding as it should.
That makes me think about all those times when I resisted change, or I tried so hard to control things that were completely beyond my control. It's like I was making myself suffer more than I needed to.
Yeah. That's a very human thing to do. We all crave certainty. We want to know what's going to happen. But life is inherently uncertain. And, it's in that uncertainty that we find the greatest opportunities for growth and transformation.
So maybe the key is to embrace that uncertainty and see it as an invitation to kind of go on an adventure, to step outside of our comfort zones and trust that we have everything we need inside of us to handle whatever comes our way.
Exactly. And as we kind of continue on this journey of individuation, Jung believed that we start to tap into something much bigger than ourselves, what he called the collective unconscious.
Okay, this is starting to sound a bit mystical. Can you explain what that even means?
Yeah, it can be kind of mind-blowing. The collective unconscious is like this huge reservoir of images and symbols and archetypes that are shared by all of humanity. It's like this well of ancient wisdom and experience that we inherit and that we can tap into.
So it's like we're all connected on a deeper level than we even realize, that we're all part of this giant web of life.
Yes, and when we can connect to this deeper part of ourselves, we can access so much creativity, intuition, and guidance that goes way beyond our own individual ego.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I feel like I have a totally new perspective on life, on myself, and even on the world around me. I'm definitely going to be reading more of Jung's work.
Oh, I highly recommend it. His writing is so full of wisdom and insight, things that can keep guiding us along this journey of self-discovery.
So to all of our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to learn more, check out some of Jung's books or, explore all those amazing resources that are out there online.
And don't forget, the most important journey is always the journey inward. Pay attention to your dreams, your synchronicities, even those little whispers from your soul. They're guiding you toward your true self.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep trusting the process.